Hello, and welcome to Dead Ideas in Teaching and Learning, a higher education podcast from the Center for Teaching and Learning at Columbia University. I'm Amanda Irvin, the Center's Executive Director. In this podcast series, we explore dead ideas in teaching and learning, beliefs that, despite being untrue, continue to shape educational systems and practices. These outdated notions, as Diane Pike described, perpetuate the tyranny of dead ideas. Join us as we challenge these misconceptions and explore innovative approaches to higher education. Welcome, everyone. I'm speaking today with Dr. Robert Gray. Rob is Associate Professor of University Pedagogy at the University of Bergen in Bergen, Norway, where he leads the TEL-ED, which is Teaching and Learning in Higher Education, research group, which has grown into an international network of over 500 researchers. He's been working in educational development for over 25 years, and his current research focuses primarily on his writerly framework for teaching and learning, which is based on the work of literary theorist Roland Barthes. In addition, he's published 3 books of poetry and directed an award-winning documentary film on race relations in the American South. Welcome to our Dead Ideas podcast, Rob. I'm so delighted that you're with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So I've been looking forward to our conversation today because you take on some fairly pervasive misconceptions or dead ideas about the role of the student and instructor in the learning process in a recent article which is titled "Learning is Like an Act of Writing: The Writerly Turn in Teaching and Learning in Higher Education." And one of the most prominent dead ideas that you seem to take head on is that teaching and learning is an act of production rather than consumption. That, and this is a quote, that students cannot take whatever a professor or textbook says and store it in their mental hard drives to be retrieved whenever needed in whatever context. And you employ theories about writing to help illustrate this idea that learning is like an act of writing because higher ed is about creating something new in people. And I will confess being really drawn to discussions like yours right now, discussions about this messy work of production and meaning making in education, because a lot of the conversations that seem to swirl around higher ed, at least in the United States, are really monopolized right now by generative AI tools, which promise to offload or outsource some of this meaning making in production. But we're going to get to that a little bit later. So I know there's a lot to discuss here, but perhaps we could start with you telling us a little bit more about this writerliness. So what does that mean? What might it mean in conversations about teaching and learning? And I will also invite you to clarify any aspects of your argument that I might have gotten completely wrong in that little introduction I just gave.
It all sounded pretty good to me. I mean, it's hard to know exactly where to start with all of this, but one of the things that's driving my thinking currently, and probably from the beginning, is that, and I say this a lot, is that learning is not an act of recording. And I think a lot of teachers and lecturers particularly sort of assume that students will just sort of record what they say and then have it there. But that's not what works. Learning is an act of rewriting what has been said. And sort of going with that assumption, maybe not fully articulated 20 something years ago when I was writing my PhD, knew I was going to do something on online learning, but I didn't know what. And I had previously studied literature and literary theory, and somewhere along the line, I ran across this idea of Roland Barthes' writerly and readerly text and how it sort of aligned with Mikhail Bakhtín's novel and epic text, and I connected it with what I knew about Umberto Eco's open and closed text. And I just started thinking how Barthes says that the only way you can tell how good a literary text is by how writerly it is. And what writerly means is how much the act of reading becomes an act of rewriting. And so that the act of reading a text involves the reader in a co-creative process. It's, as he says, the reader is no longer a consumer, but a producer of the text. And so I started playing with this idea of how, and thinking about what is quality in online learning, maybe the writerly is the value that we need to use to determine whether an online course is successful or not. And then as I've thought about it over the last 20 years, I've sort of shifted more from, is this really something that we want to get any, even into the business of quality? It's become such a horrible buzzword in the neoliberal world that I think of it almost more as a design value rather than as an evaluation value. But I think it works both ways. So if you think about reading and writing as the same thing, I think the first time I ever wrote a teaching philosophy statement, I was teaching writing mostly, and I said that to me, reading, writing, and thinking are the same thing. Either way, you're creating meaning. And writing helps you read better, reading helps you write better. Both of them make you think better. But it's all about this idea of production. And I can't remember if it was this article or the one that came out before it in Transformative Dialogues, but one of the reviewers wanted me to quote a Marxist theorist on learning as production. And I did it, and I think it works. But I think it also gets to be a little bit distracted from what I really think about this. It's becoming a producer of their own learning. I always go back to the middle school statement that your teacher always say, write this in your own words. It's like paraphrasing almost, but oftentimes it creates something that is new. And something else that I think a lot around these things, and I've written in a few articles, is that there is no true curriculum for a discipline. There might be a concept that everybody understands sort of as a baseline thing for this discipline or this idea, but nobody understands it in the same way. If you got the top 20 people in the field to write as objectively as they possibly can what their understanding of this concept is, they would all be different. When you give a lecture or a presentation and the people in the audience are listening to you, they're hearing the same words, but they're creating individual meanings based on their perspectives and their context and their level of understanding. And to me, this is all sort of self-evident. Often question whether I'm actually saying anything new here. I'm just trying to make people aware that this is how students are actually hearing you. And so you should really think about how and what you say differently because you're trying to lead and instigate this process rather than just sort of letting it happen without you as part of that process.
Mm, right. No, I appreciate that. We both come from literary theory backgrounds, so like this is super fun for us, especially for me. When I think about this, I'm thinking about what you just said about like helping faculty think about like what are we there to do? How are students hearing us? What do we want students to do with the learning experiences that we're trying to guide in the classroom? And this idea of learning as writerly and this whole idea of production, the hope, you tell me if I'm getting this right, the hope is that students will take what we are facilitating in a classroom, a learning experience, and that they will write it into something new, either in their own brains or actually writing it out on paper, but that there's an engagement with the material to create something different. And we hope that that's happening in all of the brains and minds of the people who show up in our classrooms.
Yeah, and another thing related to that is that when I talk about this to groups of people, there's often different types of pushback from that. Like people in STEM will say this might apply in the humanities, but it doesn't apply in STEM. And other people might say that this is good for graduate students, but it's not good for first year students. And that may or may not be true, but I don't think there's a switch that you can flip. You can treat your undergraduates in a very readerly way and then try to get them to work in a writerly way when they become graduate students as though they just suddenly evolved into something new. Starting that system and getting them on that path earlier, I think is pretty important. The thing is that universities are about creating knowledge, and that's not just for the professors to do in their laboratories. That's something that the whole campus culture should always be about. It's about creating new understandings of things. And student one's understanding might be pretty straightforward and literal interpretation, if that's an oxymoron, but it could be, a literal take on what was presented in the curriculum. Student two might add something to it. Student three might come up with some crazy new observation that nobody ever thought about that down the line might lead to famous new understandings, but getting students into that mindset that their job as students is to create this new understanding and to get it, not just to record it, but to be able to make something that is their own that they can then use, I think is why we're here. And if it's not why we're here, then what are we doing here?
No, I hear you completely. I think you're exactly right. And something I really like about what you just said is that it's not, I mean, sure, this happens at an individual level with students, but it also happens with a community of learners. It's part of why being together in a space, whether it be virtual or in person, and that sharing of ideas, it's part of why it's so important because we make each other, I don't want to say we make each other better, but we certainly make each other different. We offer different perspectives. We are better together, especially when it comes to teasing apart and putting back together and creating something new in a discipline. So I have a question. We've talked a little bit about why this is good for learning, though we could certainly talk more about that. But when we think about the writerly as being of value for enacting good teaching and learning, I'm curious also about the how. If faculty members are listening to our conversation right now and they're like, that sounds amazing, how do I do that? What might we say to those people who are listening?
Oh, ironically, I left this part out of the original story. I was developing these ideas initially in like 2004, 2005, and I defended my dissertation proposal with a 110-page lit review, which was what this was all about. And then my supervisor left to go to another university across the country, and I could not figure out how to do the empirical piece of this. So I ended up rewriting my dissertation into a theoretical piece that wasn't empirical. And then I got a job that wasn't research focused. And so I spent another almost 10 years just letting this sit on the shelf. And then I came here to Bergen and started thinking about, okay, my research plan is to figure out how to employ this empirically to sort of how can we use the writerly as our value. And even that took several years to sort of get my head around and took a sabbatical to go talk to some people. And then it just sort of this light bulb went off. And some of that happened with giving a presentation at a different ISOTL conference than the one where we met. And Laura Cruz was in the room when I gave this presentation, and we ran at each other in the hall later and started talking about how we need to collaborate on something. And we just had an article accepted in IJAD where we look at 3 different online courses and we created what we call a protocol. It's kind of like a rubric, but not really, where we divide the writerly into 3 dimensions, where one is creating spaces for the writerly to happen. The second one is engaging in dialogue, which is basically getting students to interact with the content and with each other. And then the third one is making meaning, which is that piece of creating something new where they're making it meaningful for them. And so we put this into a table and we have 2 different columns in the table. One is exemplary moments where the writerly is happening in this course, and the other one is opportunities where the writerly might happen with a little bit more attention to making it happen. So for this article, we went through 3 different courses, and they were from 3 different disciplines with 3 different levels of instructor experiences, and they were also from 3 different universities. And we just found moments of each of those types in the courses. We actually, the original version of the article, we had several instances, but they made us cut down the word length, so we had to cut some of it out. So there might be some more things on that later. One of my favorite quotes from Barth is he says something, and I'm probably not going to quote it exactly, but you would have a hard time finding a writerly text in a bookstore. The idea of a writerly text is not something that is real in terms of a totality of the text. The writerly happens in moments. Bart's mode of analysis is he uses what he calls lexias, and it can be a single word or phrase or a sentence or two, but it's what he calls a unit of meaning. The best we can do is sort of have lexias that are writerly. We can have these individual moments, and even the best course is going to have a lot of readerliness about it, but where we can find the key moments to try to make it writerly is what I think really matters. And having awareness of when can we try to strive for this writerly to make it happen, and when can we recognize that and learn how to make that part of not only our delivery of instruction or teaching and learning, but also in how to change the students' practice to where they're not just rotely consuming the material, but are also trying to produce it.
That goes back to what we were saying earlier. Maybe I quoted you saying that we can't expect students to be hard drives and that they're able to just replicate or pull out this information when we need it. This is perhaps a good moment, since we're talking about hard drives, to transition to a question that is perhaps predictable. But can we talk about artificial intelligence for a minute?
I'll give you 1 minute.
Okay, great, 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 great.
I have a complicated relationship with AI because, I'm the technology person in our university pedagogy team. And somehow when AI hit a year and a half ago or whenever that was, a lot of the other, what I call Luddites in our team, dove in full bore and were just really into this. And so I said, okay, I'm going to let you do that, and I'm going to work on my own stuff for a while. And I've kind of kept up. I've paid attention, but I'm still sort of in the place where I think it's neat more than it's good. I mean, it's amazing technology. It does incredible things when you think of it as technology. But for the kinds of things that it's getting credit for being, I'm not sold on it yet. I told you this the other day, and it's really relevant here in Norway, but I think it's kind of true everywhere. In Norway, the overwhelming number of university courses have one huge written exam at the end, usually 4 or 6 hours. And that is the only grade that students get. It's total pass or fail kind of thing. You get your grade. And there's all these professors saying that I put my exam into ChatGPT and it did better than my students. And I've been saying for years that a student with A-level writing ability and C or D level content knowledge will do better on an exam than a student with A-level content knowledge and C or D level writing ability. And to me, ChatGPT has maybe not A-level writing ability, but pretty close, and it has C or D level content knowledge. So it doesn't have much to say, but it says it well, and so it comes across as good. Whereas our students have something to say, but they probably don't say it well because they're in this very stressful situation, and so they don't write it as well. And we just sort of unconsciously determine how good a piece of writing is by how well written it is, not by what it has to say. So I've gotten to where I say, if ChatGPT can do better on our exams than our students, then what do we need students for? And I've mused over the last several months that maybe the writerly can be a sort of antidote to the horrors of ChatGPT from an assessment standpoint. But I think the horror of ChatGPT is not about assessment. It's about how it replaces thinking. What is exciting about ChatGPT to me is that it should make us rethink what we're doing here. What is the purpose of higher education? What do we want our students to get out of being here at our university? Over 10 years ago, when I did my interview for this position, I was supposed to talk about active learning. And I said, when I started university in the early 80s, if I needed information, there are two places I could go. I could go to the library, or I could go to an expert, such as a professor. Now I have access to more information in my phone than I did in the liberal arts college library I started at in 1983. Education is not about information. If we're just giving them information, let's just give them phones. And, or I joke about Norway. The exam is so fetishized here. I say, why do we even have teaching? Why don't we just have a library and an exam office? We can't teach something that's not in the reading list. So why do we teach at all? What is it that we're teaching? How are we trying to get students to use the information that they don't need us for? They need us to help them do something with the information and make meaning, to show them what it means to think deeply and fruitfully about a topic, not just how to recite the definition of a theory.
Yeah, I agree. And it's part of why I wanted to talk with you about AI, because this idea of the writerly, and we love applying theories about one thing to something else and seeing what happens. It's part of the fun. But the
Sure.
theory of the writerly, perhaps the way it interacts with teaching and learning is it feels to me like a way in or like a different entry point into the conversations about AI, especially around writing, because that is, especially in the United States, a lot of what our conversation is around, like the skill set of writing. And if writing is the way that we organize our thinking in many respects, then what happens when we outsource that or if students are outsourcing that? And I don't know, I feel like there might be some potential in helping us get through this quagmire if we think about trying to produce something new and activating those parts of students' brains while also wrestling with this idea of like we have, like you said, more access to information than we've ever had before, all of these tools at our disposal. And so, like, what does flexing those muscles look like now in this moment? And I don't have any answers. There's like a
Well,
lot of ideas and theories.
I don't really have any answers either, but I think it comes into thinking about questions more than answers. What are the questions that we need to ask to get the kind of creative mental activity going to lead to this thing? And that's another place where I think the writerly might, at least after a few steps, lead to something. I've been asked over all the years I've been doing this writerly thing is how is this different from active learning? And the only good answer I have, and I'm not even sure if it's a good one, is it gives us a sense of what that activity is leading to without reifying that, without locking it into a box, but it's giving the sense of productivity and creativity and meaning making that I think is often lost when people are designing active learning things. So if we can spend some time thinking about, okay, what is happening in the moment? So I've got this active learning or other kind of assignment where I want my students interacting with some piece of material. And what are the cognitive processes that I want to be happening when students are doing that interaction? What is the intended outcome, sort of divorced from stereotypical university pedagogy language? What is it that I want to happen in their minds in these moments? What are the questions that they need to be asking? What are the questions that we need to be asking to get them to ask those questions to lead to this something new that the writerly gets at? And I think if we can pursue that and think about what that means, then AI is not going to go there. And that's where, AI gives the correct answer, presumably correct, in a low level way. And we don't want that. And people say, well, if you know how to do prompts and you work through it enough rounds that you can get it to give you the right information. But if you know how to do that, then you don't need it to give you the information. And it's easier just to write it yourself than to go through 15 rounds of getting ChatGPT to give you a good answer. Then let it rewrite it for you to make it sound better.
It's true. I sometimes think that if we wanted to engage students with AI tools and this, like asking good questions, critical thinking, and I've talked to some faculty members about this, like if you want to incorporate AI into an assignment, and some of the goals is asking good questions and seeing the ways that students are thinking about materials, evaluate the questions that they're prompting the AI with rather than the responses that are coming out. Grade the
Mhm.
questions because that shows you an evolution of student thinking about a topic in a way that the response that really didn't involve their brains at all doesn't in the same way, right? Or perhaps at all. So let's see. I think it's safe to say that we both have a lot of questions. But one thing that we know for certain, or it seems from this conversation, is that teaching students to ask good questions is probably at the top of the list when it comes to like getting them to engage in a writerly way with their teaching and learning, teaching critical thinking skills, which seem to be part and parcel with almost every discipline, at least in the United States, and that maybe we don't have any answers, but we're certainly gonna practice asking really good questions. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today for our 10th season of Dead Ideas. It has been such a pleasure.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please review our website where you can find any resources mentioned in this episode, ctl.columbia.edu/podcast. Please like us, rate us, and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Dead Ideas is produced by Stephanie Ogden, Lauren Close, Michael Brown, and Sarah Carswell. Our theme music is In the Lab by Immersive Music.